So let me start out with a question here. Show of hands. How many people think the federal government is efficient and effective? How many people think it's pretty broken and dysfunctional? Does it surprise you that the previous three speakers have spoken about problems with the federal government? It doesn't surprise me in the slightest. One of the reasons it's so broken and dysfunctional is the federal government has taken upon itself all these duties that were never enumerated to it by the Constitution. They're completely incapable of fulfilling these duties. Now, I come from the private sector, in manufacturing in particular. And so when you're manufacturing, you solve an awful lot of problems. And you find out very quickly there's a process to going through that problem solving. That skill set, by and large, certainly in Congress, does not exist. It just doesn't exist. It exists in the military. I would argue it exists in some of these agencies, which is why Congress kind of recognizes it, so they punt, and they let the agencies have all this power. But it's a very dangerous thing for a constitutional government to rely on bureaucrats to settle the policies. So again, I'm just trying to get you to understand a little bit why you're so dissatisfied and why every presidential election seems to be a changing election. We have enormous challenges, we have enormous problems with these programs that the federal government shouldn't be doing, and of course they can't really solve it, which is why we're $22 trillion in debt. We have, over the next 30 years, projected deficits additionally of over $100 trillion. Just real quick, three elements. We've got about $18 trillion more in Social Security benefits than we're going to take into payroll tax, $38 trillion in Medicare. The rest, over $55 trillion, is used on the debt. So again, from a business guy and an accounting standpoint, it's pretty simple what you need to address: Social Security and Medicare. If you want to pay your creditors $55 trillion, nobody's even talking about that. What we're talking about is, hey, let's get more benefits. How about Medicare for all, which would cost $32 to $38 trillion? Because in politics, rhetoric and demagoguery are the coin of the realm. Actually solving problems is just kind of by the wayside. Now, how does this relate to national security? We are in a geopolitical competition, and our competitors, by and large, are dictators. They're very long-term thinkers. They've got strategies. The 100-year marathon. The Chinese, this is Trump, I was in the White House with him, he's talking about Wilbur Ross negotiating with Chinese people. He said a dozen Chinese across the table from all with 170 IQ. Now, it might have been a bit of an embellishment, but it's largely accurate. China's a meritocracy. Only the smartest rise to the top. They're in power for 40 years. They have a very long-term strategy, and it is to replace us. And until we recognize that, we're going to have a hard time competing with them. But that's just one of their advantages, being strategic. So they're buying up all these strategic assets, rare earth minerals, ports. What are we doing? We're relying on the private sector, and we don't really have government helping produce a counter strategy for that. The advantage we have, I would argue, is we do have a system that works. We do embrace values, liberty, pluralism, democracy. Our capitalist system is not perfect, but it's the most efficient allocator of capital in the world. So we do have a vastly superior economic system, but when China has all this all these plans, for example, China 2025, what does that mean? So what China's going to do over the next 6 or 7 years is they're going to do to 10 other major industries what they did to the steel industry. They'll bankrupt in every other country other than for China. And we need to respond to that. So again, that's just quick give you a little hint in terms of what we're dealing with in our global competition with China. Russia's the same way, very long-term strategic thinking. Iran's long-term. North Korea, Islamic terror. These folks are long-term strategic thinkers. And of course, we in our government are very short-term. We're churning over our Congress every 2 years, administrations every 4 to 8 years. Economically, what are our businesses looking at? Quarterly results. So we're a society that's increasingly short-term thinking, competing against people with incredibly long-term strategic views run by very smart people. We need to keep that in mind if we're going to have any chance of competing with them. Now, as a business person, I like mission statements. And so when I became chairman of Homeland Security, I developed a mission statement for our committee. Pretty simple. To enhance the economic and national security of America. Notice what I put first, economic. If you're going to have a secure nation, you first have to be secure economically. It's one of the reasons I think China, and this is Michael Pillsbury's book, they've shown us their cauldron, the size of their cauldron. They made that strategic mistake because they recognize our economic weakness, $22 trillion in debt. We need to focus on our economy, and that's exactly what President Trump has done. The most significant thing this administration has done economically is we stopped adding to the regulatory burden. We've actually reduced it a little bit. Now, as a business guy, for business people, what does that do? That allows you, at least for 4 years, to recognize I can concentrate on producing better products, better services. I don't have to look over my shoulder at another government regulation that's going to put me out of business or to force me into high compliance costs. That's the most significant thing. That's the level of optimism that's gotten us out of the economic doldrums and allowed us to grow at more than 3% for the first time in a decade. It's very significant. Plus, we made our tax system more competitive globally. I'm highly concerned, although I share President Trump's goals of resetting the global trading system, demanding more fair and reciprocal treatment, particularly from China, doing everything we can to get them to stop stealing our stuff through cyber theft, through espionage. So I completely agree with his goal. I'm a little concerned about the strategy. I'm a little concerned about the instability the trade wars are causing. So from my standpoint, the sooner we can get those agreements, the better to return that stability. Now, in the committee after that mission statement, we basically have 4 major goals. And these have been placed now for 4 years, and I've got two years left of my chairmanship. Nothing's changed, because these are the priorities. Border security, cyber security, protecting our critical infrastructure, and countering violent extremism. Hasn't really changed much. Now what can a committee really do? Within this function of Washington, D.C., it's kind of hard to pass legislation, although, using a business person's perspective, trying to find areas of agreement, under my chairmanship, we've literally passed and signed into law almost 100 pieces of legislation in just the last 2 Congresses. Now, they haven't saved the world, but they've identified a problem, they found a bipartisan solution, and that's why we were able to pass it. And so that's what we need to focus on. We need to try and find those areas of agreement. But it starts with the problem-solving process. So let me quick walk you through that. Then I'm going to use the immigration debate as a prime example of that. Now, in the business world, in any kind of problem-solving process, you begin with gathering of information. You try and define the problem properly. You try and define root cause analysis. What's actually causing this problem? Once you've gathered all that information, and you never have perfect information, the next step is to set an achievable goal. No, don't set a pie-in-the-sky goal, but an achievable goal. Once you've done all that work, and that's a lot of work, it's a lot of preparation, then you finally start designing solutions. The reason you're so dissatisfied, the reason Washington is so dysfunctional, it completely bypasses all that hard work and it immediately goes to a solution. Often written by some staff member. And by the way, here's another big problem in Washington, D.C. There are so very few members of the bureaucracy, of staff, or members of Congress that ever really worked in the private sector. They don't have knowledge of it. They have very little sympathy for it. They know they're really smart, and they're more than happy to bring their intelligence and impose it on you in the private sector. So anyway, so these geniuses that don't really understand the private sector come up with a piece of legislation. They convince their member of Congress to put his name or her name on top of it, and then they start debating. So it's generally a piece of legislation not really designed toward an achievable goal, and it's completely divorced from reality. I pretty well described the dysfunction that you all recognize in Washington, D.C. So let's change this paradigm a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening on the border. And we've got this. What this chart is, I've been developing this now literally in about 30 different hearings within our committee on border security. We'll go back to start with 2009, 10, 11. Unaccompanied children, because let me first set the stage. The problem back in, let's say, 1986 through early 2000s was Mexican economic migrants. Now, we don't have that big a problem, I would argue, because of NAFTA. I think NAFTA was highly successful. Depending on the date we choose, our exports to Canada and Mexico have increased $200 to $300 billion per year. I personally consider that a success. I know that's not the general narrative out there. But anyway, because of that success, Mexico probably doesn't have enough workers. We don't have the Mexican economic migrants. Now what we have is the destruction of public institutions because of our insatiable demand for drugs, which have given rise to the drug cartel and destroyed the public institutions in Central America. That's obviously created a push factor. The major pull factor we have for unaccompanied children and families from Central America is we are the best country to live in, bar none. We are a land of unlimited opportunity. That is a huge pull factor. Throw on top of that our laws, which I'll talk about, which incentivize and reward people to try and come to this country illegally. So, going back to the chart, 2009, 10, 11, on average, 3,000 to 4,000 unaccompanied children came to this country illegally and were apprehended per year. Okay, how do you do this? Okay. 2012, something dramatically changed. President Obama, and I would argue unconstitutionally, issued the DACA memorandum. Does not apply to anybody in the future. Only applies to people in the past, which, quite honestly, I think I've got a great deal of sympathy. We need to fix that problem. It's about 1.7 million people at least brought to this country as a child, through no fault of their own. The younger, the more sympathetic. But anyway, so President Obama issued that DACA memorandum, and you see more people started coming in here because the smuggling coyotes used that government change in action and said, now you're welcome. You're going to get a slip of paper called a permiso. It's actually a notice to appear to court, but the coyotes saying this is going to be your permission slip to come in America. So they started to come. It culminated in 2014 when they're huge, what President Obama referred to as a humanitarian crisis at the border of all these unaccompanied children. By the way, I went down there to McAllen, Texas with Democrats, and we were all singing the praises of CBP for establishing this center to, first of all, delouse, shower, clothe, feed. These people are coming in pretty tough shape from a very dangerous journey. Everybody was praising it. It's the exact same center now the Democrats are calling cages. But anyway, President Obama declared that a humanitarian crisis, and it was. So President Obama and DHS Secretary Jay Johnson realized we have to do something about this. So what did they start doing? They started detaining the families with their children so they could do a determination whether they have a valid asylum claim. Now, why is detention important? Where we detain somebody, we actually can remove about 77% that don't have a valid asylum claim. If we don't detain, we only return 7%. So you can see it worked. In 2015, it almost dropped in half the number of people coming as unaccompanied children and families because they were detained. Only 15% have a valid asylum claim, is the basic of reality right now. So those other 85%, once determined it wasn't valid, we removed them. It's a huge deterrent. By the way, 2005, Secretary Chertoff had the exact same issue with a surge of Brazilians coming to this country, about 31,000 in 2005. He realized we have to do something about this, so he set up a program of expedited removal back to Brazil called Texas Hold'em, next year 1,400. So again, President Obama realized what we need to do, and we realize what we need to do now. But what happened is somebody took President Obama to court. And so the Flores Agreement, which was all about a young little girl from El Salvador named Jenny Flores, a long process of agreements and court cases, all types of things, resulted in the Flores Agreement, which applied to unaccompanied children. Took them to court, and all of a sudden the Flores Agreement was reinterpreted to apply to accompanied children as well. And so President Obama faced the exact same dilemma President Trump did. Do we enforce the law? Or do we enforce a law which require you to separate children after 20 days because we can only retain children for 20 days under the Flores Agreement, or do we simply release them all? Well, that began full-fledged catch and release. So President Trump came into office 2017 talking pretty tough. We had a little bit of downturn in illegal immigration. But then once the coyotes, and once everybody realized there's nothing changed in our law, when we get there, we still are going to get this notice to appear. They can't hold us. And so we get entered into America. And by the way, after 6 months, if you claim asylum, you also get a work permit. So most people coming in now, this is a well-oiled machine. This isn't just a bunch of people independently picking up stakes and moving up to America. They pay the coyotes, very well organized, and you pay them sometimes half a year's salary, a year's worth of salary, and they're exploiting our system. In our hearings, we had 2 interesting hearings the last 2 weeks. One of the revelations was that the southern border is completely secure on the Mexican side. Nobody passes. Nobody crosses that border unless they pay the ransom to the coyotes, the transnational criminal organization, the human traffickers, the drug cartels. Totally secure. Anyway, Trump tried zero tolerance, tried enforcing the law. That obviously did not work, and I did not support it, by the way. And once he ended zero tolerance, you're off to the races. And here's the sad reality facing today. All those other bars are a year. The last bar is 6 months. So in 6 months, because of the rewards we provide, that come on in this country, you get to stay, you can get a work permit, we've had almost 240,000, now primarily families. They're recycling children, by the way. An adult male will come in with a child and send the child back across the border and pick up another adult male. This is unbelievably organized. People have to understand how these drug cartels, these transnational criminal organizations, are viewing America as a bunch of chumps for allowing this to happen. So, what's the solution? Go back to what Michael Chertoff was talking about, is we need to be able to detain people, which means we need to modify, and by the way, codify parts of the Flores Agreement where it ensures that we hold people in very humane conditions, but we need to be able to detain them long enough. We need the resources so we can rapidly adjudicate those asylum claims. First of all, we have to be far more accurate in how we make that determination. Right now, if we've set the bar so low that only 15% actually have a valid asylum claim, that bar is too low. We need a better legal standard, like more than likely, so that at least 50% or 70 or 80% actually have a valid asylum claim. Those people we let into the country. The other people, we hold them and we remove them with great humanity, return them to the country very safely. And by the way, we can do it. I was down in Guatemala, and we actually saw a plane come in of returned individuals. Comes into an incredibly clean center, a bank of phones for folks to call their relatives to come pick them up. They're greeted. And I don't speak Spanish, but it is being interpreted for me, where the Guatemalans were welcoming their citizens back and say, "You're our future. We want you to stay in Guatemala." The entire room exploded in cheers. Okay, so they're not war zones. Central America certainly has deficient and dilapidated public institutions because of our insatiable demand for drugs. We owe them a responsibility to try and clean that up. But returning people to Guatemala is not returning to a war zone. It's the humane thing to do. It's the only way we can solve this problem, having gone through a problem-solving process, understanding what's caused it, the root cause of it, and designing a solution that will actually work. Thank you.